Okay. One of the problems that we have when we're looking at medicine, I'm trying to communicate with a doctor friend of mine. Part of the problem is we can't figure out why something is happening. And of course, that's what we're looking for in medicine. We had this problem with the HIV virus. The HIV virus, anyway, with HIV, we had this problem with HIV. We saw where it was, but we didn't know what was causing it. We assumed it was a sexually transmitted disease because all these gay males were coming down with it. But we didn't know what the cause was. And for the longest time, and there were arguments as to what was going on. Does it have something to do with homosexuality? Does it have something to do with bathhouses in New York and San Francisco? These were the individuals that seemed to be coming down with it. And of course, it wasn't until it skipped out of the gay community into the drug-using community that we actually figured out what was going on. I mean, there were people in the United States, even to this day, there are people in the United States who would claim that it is a gay disease. But the reality is, the vast majority of people in Africa who have contracted HIV have contracted it in heterosexual relationships. So there's something going on. And, well, obviously, now that we know how it was transmitted, and we know where it came from, but it took us years to figure this. It took us decades to figure all this out. So causality is a problem, especially if we're talking about diseases. Right now we've got a measles outbreak going on in the United States. It started in one county in Washington, where 7 to 8% of the population had not inoculated their children against the measles. There was an outbreak at Disneyland 3 years ago. There was somebody who had not been inoculated, contracted the measles, and then all the kids that they came in contact with who had not been inoculated against the measles contracted the measles. So we had this strange measles outbreak. As long as you had inoculated your kid, you were okay. But if you were one of those individuals that didn't believe in inoculation, your kid came down with the measles. Now this is kind of an interesting problem because people die from the measles. It's not everybody. It's like somewhere between 5 and 10%, depending on what type of measles it is. This is some really serious stuff. We had almost eradicated the measles virus. And then people stopped inoculating their children. And the reason they stopped inoculating their children was because of autism. People were developing autism after they were inoculated. Really? Really? Is that what was going on? Now we've proven that that wasn't true at all. That autism and inoculation have nothing to do with one another. Now, when do you know that your baby is autistic? When does that happen?
I think the characteristics starts to show, like with their toys, how they repeat.
How they play. So how old are they when they start doing these things? Do you know right away that your baby is autistic? If there's something wrong with your baby, do you recognize it right away? No, you're rationalizing in your own mind that that's normal, that this child is as normal as the next guy. Okay, so potentially, it's right when you start inoculating your child as to when they start interacting more with you. And so one thing has nothing to do with the other. But there are a lot of people in the United States, well, 7% in that one county just north of Portland, Oregon, in Washington State, who chose not to inoculate their children, and now their children have the measles. So their children may die of the measles. Could happen. We haven't lost anybody yet, but we're still waiting. The measles are the most dangerous. The younger you are, and the younger you are when you contract it, the more likely you're going to have a really negative reaction. Children who have the measles have lost their hearing, they've lost their eyesight because of the high fever. Measles represent high fever. So the question is causality, and we have looked at two different things, one thing that has nothing to do with the other, and some people have determined that that is the cause. One of those individuals was Ginny McCarthy, whose son is autistic, and he seemed to develop autism right after he got inoculated. But of course, one thing had nothing to do with the other. So the problem is causality. So how in the world do we determine this? The evidence must be consistent with a meta-analysis. In other words, you have to look at a lot of different research in order to determine if that is true or not. Now, this is, and this is not what happened with the autism being connected to the inoculation study. There was one study that showed a positive correlation between inoculation and autism. One study. But what they needed to do was look at all the studies that people have been doing. Now, these individuals make a lot of money. They can make a lot of money by doing this type of research, by accumulating this type of information. The health department accumulates this information on a continual basis, just to make sure that we haven't let something slip through the cracks. The alleged cause must have been in place before the disease appeared, and of course that is part of the problem as well. Travis, how you feeling? Not there yet, but you're getting better. The cause and effect relationship must make sense. Get inoculated with whatever you're getting inoculated with, and autism is created after that. That's not what we saw. There must be a dose-response relationship between the risk factor and the disease process, as with smoking and cancer. Remember, people have been smoking forever, and we didn't connect cancer and smoking until people started living longer, and then we started seeing more cancer. People were dying in their 40s of heart attacks. People were dying in their 50s of heart attacks. They weren't dying of cancer yet because they weren't living long enough to develop cancer. But then once people started living into their 60s, now all of a sudden people that smoked were dying of lung cancer. As I told you before, for some reason I've always been fascinated with obituaries. I used to read them all the time, and I would go, yes, that person died. That person was younger than my dad when he died. My family has longevity. I was trying to determine if my family lived longer than other individuals. And what I determined was that, yeah, we live into our 90s, which is pretty good. I'm thinking it's especially good since I'm 70 right now, and so I've got at least 20 more years to go. And Sharon's in the background. Oh, damn. No, I'm going to live for at least 20 more years, maybe 30. It's possible. Don't cry. Don't cry. Yeah, I'll live for at least 30 more years. The strength of the association between the alleged cause and the health outcome, the relative risk must suggest causality. The incidence or prevalence of the health outcome must drop when the alleged causal factor is removed, as with the decline of cholera after the contaminated well was closed in London in 1854. So we're looking for causality, and that's what health psychology is all about. Health psychology is trying to determine what the factors are. And health psychology tends to have to do with trying to prolong people's lives using psychology, of course. Oklahoma, okay. I lived in Oklahoma. For 4 years I lived in Oklahoma. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. So let's go to chapter 3. So that's primarily what health psychology is about. We're trying to prolong people's lives. And we do this in different ways. I have a friend who is an eye, ear, nose, and throat doctor. So when he looks at somebody, he sees their eyes, he sees their ears, he sees their noses, and he sees their throat. So if you went to him and said, I think I'm having a heart attack, he would go, really? let me look in your eyes and see what I can see. He focuses, and a lot of doctors do this. You'll have a cardiologist that just looks at people's hearts. Hopefully they're holistic doctors so that they look at the whole individual. What was I was trying to talk to my doctor about stress the other day. He's a GP, and it just went completely over his head, no clue. Oh, last semester was tough. I just about killed myself. The stress was so high. Said your blood pressure is a little high. Well, I've been under a lot of stress. I explained to him. And it just went completely over his head. Why? What pill can he give me to reduce my stress? Maybe Valium, but probably not. Make me more depressed. Thank you. That's very good. Yeah, he's going to hit me with some fentanyl. Yeah, he's pissed because he doesn't like me. He doesn't like it when I come in because he can't give me opiates.
Yeah, but
I know. You know how doctors are. They want to treat you. They want to just throw pills at you. I keep knocking them back. No way. Okay, we're going to talk about the biological aspect of health psychology, health and illness. There's two types of cells in the world, prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are single-cell organisms like bacteria. They're really tiny, and that's one type of cell. The other cells are eukaryotic cells. They're very complex. They make up the human body. They make up all organisms, actually. They are far more organized than the prokaryotic cell, as strange as that may seem. They have a membrane-bound internal structures called organelles, like the nucleus that serves to control the center. So this is a eukaryotic cell. The eukaryotic cell is far more organized than the prokaryotic cell. The prokaryotic cell has no nucleus. It has no organelles. It has unbound DNA that wanders around in the cell, the DNA. And this is one of the reasons why the AIDS virus is a prokaryotic cell. And this is one of the reasons why it is able to exchange its DNA for your DNA, because it's just kind of wandering around. If we look at a eukaryotic cell, the DNA is in a specific place. And it's very linear in a eukaryotic cell. But with a prokaryotic cell, it just kind of circulates around. It's not in any place stable. These guys are little bitty tiny things. If we talk about a rotavirus, or we're talking about a virus or a bacteria, these are really small cells. And this is one of the reasons why it took us so long to figure out why they were causing diseases. We couldn't find them. We didn't know they were in there. We thought they might be there, but we didn't know it. And this is one of the reasons why when Europeans first came to the Americas, that they caused so much, they wreaked so much havoc with their diseases. Because a lot of these diseases were viral, and they had no clue what they were. They didn't know what they were. They were idiots. And they just kept spreading these strange viruses, smallpox, measles, mumps, chickenpox. All of these diseases killed people because you had no natural immunity. You'd never been around this stuff before. So they killed off as many as 99% of your population in the Americas. That's Central America, South America, and North America. What was I reading this weekend? For the longest time, they didn't think that there were very many people here. Part of it was rationalization. They were assuming that they were taking over an area that didn't have any people in it. They wanted to think that way because it would have been easier just to seize the land. But now we realize that there may have been as many as 100 million people in the Americas. I was reading an article this weekend. They were talking about global warming, and they said when all of the natives died in the Americas, from the diseases mostly, but there was also warfare taking place at the same time. The individuals had cleared all of this land for farmland so that they could create food. And what happened was it was abandoned, so it grew up in forests. They became forests, all these fields. And that changed the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere. It lowered the carbon dioxide level, raised the oxygen level. And it actually caused a mini ice age. That's what they call it, a mini ice age. So it actually changed the world when so many people died here. If you talk to Marius, I sent him the article, so he'll talk about it too. Potentially he'll talk about it too. Well, part of the problem was they had no clue. They were clueless. They had no idea why they had all of these diseases. They lived through all these plagues in Europe. They lived with their pigs. And pigs have a similar immune system to humans. This is why we get the flu out of China every year, out of Asia every year. Because they live with their pigs. They feed their pigs on human waste. And that swaps diseases, especially the flu virus, back and forth. That's why it changes every year. We have a real serious problem with the flu this year because the flu shot doesn't seem to be working. How many people got the flu shot? Anybody? Nobody? I got one. And the little guy. Okay. Well, that's good. The older you are, the more immunocompromised you are. Potentially, the more you need a flu shot. I haven't had the flu since my last flu shot, which was like 30 years ago.
What's the reasoning for you guys not getting the flu shot? Nobody else raised their hand.
Does anybody else ever get the flu? Does anybody ever? It doesn't have to be here. It wouldn't have to be on the reservation. Not unless you had crazy Asians coming through and coughing all over you. Well, I mean, if you live in an isolated environment, then there's really no reason to get the flu shot. But if you're immunocompromised, you do need it. And if you're a young guy,
that's why I have to get it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Potentially, I'm immunocompromised, but I haven't been sick since I was in the service. 83, I got out in 83. I never get sick. Lost my spleen in 1985. I haven't been sick. Of course, they want me to get sick. This is another reason why my doctor hates me, is because I'm supposed to be disease-ridden because I don't have a spleen, and I'm not. I never get sick. It just pisses him off. He gets sick all the time. But he comes in contact with everything. But even when I worked in the lab, I never got sick. I never got the flu, even though I went through 2 flu epidemics and 2 hepatitis epidemics. I still never got sick. So a eukaryotic cell has a nucleus. It's very organized. It has all these organelles. The DNA is in a linear structure in the nucleus. We know exactly where it is. These are big guys. They're about 40 microns, 8 times bigger than these other cells. And the cell that they divide by mitosis, the prokaryotic cell just breaks in half. That's all it does, a binary fission. The human body contains 10 trillion cells. Most of these cells are not ours. They're bacteria, they're viruses. There's 200 specialized types of cells. The vast majority of cells in the human body are one of 2 types. Either they're epithelial cells, almost all the cells in your body are epithelial cells. All your glands are made up of epithelial cells. Your skin, your mucous membrane, these are all epithelial cells. And connective tissue. Bones and tendons will hold you up and keep your body together. You can get, what was it? My niece, I told you about my niece, having autoimmune diseases. One of her problems is that one of the autoimmune diseases you can get is where you break down your connective tissue. And this is known as lupus erythematosus, or lupus erythematosus. Nobody can decide how to pronounce that. Nurses pronounce it one way, doctors pronounce it another way, and everybody else pronounces it a third way. So I'm a lab tech, so I'll pronounce it erythematosus. The human body contains 30 trillion bacteria, so most of the cells in your body are actually bacteria. This is a pretty good breakdown of that. Only this percentage of your cells are ours. The rest of them are good bacteria that are floating around in your system. Okay, well, we can talk about that later. We collect information from our environment and react to it through information gathered by specialized cells called neurons. Sensory neurons collect information from the environment. Interneurons communicate between other neurons. Motor neurons, of course, communicate with muscles and glands and make you move. That's the way neurons work. At each end of the axon terminal is an open area called a synaptic cleft. Information is passed into the synapse through chemicals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters cross the synaptic cleft and attach themselves to docking stations that only react to the neurotransmitters' chemical configuration. This is really important as far as pharmaceutical companies are concerned, because they can control your mood, your behavior with these neurotransmitters. They can increase them. But usually if you take any chemicals into your system, you have a reaction, which is good, and you also have some of these reactions are not good. So we're trying to keep you from being depressed, so we're going to throw a medicine into your system that raises your serotonin level. Now you're not as unhappy as you were before. Or is everything okay? Well, potentially no, because the serotonin level also controls your sex drive, your testosterone in your hypothalamus. So all of a sudden, you're happy, but you have no sex drive. So there are side effects, and there are side effects to just about everything. Every time you take a pill, you have a reaction, and you have a reaction to that reaction. That's the way it works. So anytime you take anything into your system, so you take an aspirin. I think I talked about this last time. You take an aspirin, your headache goes away, right? But also it increases the acidity in your stomach. Now also all of a sudden you've got acid reflux. You're burping up acid. It's coming about to right here and then it goes back down into your stomach. And it hurts. And it bothers you. So what do you do? What do you want? Do you want the acid reflux or do you want the headache? Your decision. Which one is worse? Well, you don't think of the acid reflux until after you've already taken the aspirin. And now your headache's gone away. And next time you go, damn it, I wonder what's causing all this acid reflux. And the answer is, well, it was stupid aspirin you took, idiot. But you're not thinking about that because you don't think in those kinds of sequences. You always have a reaction to the drug. You also have an interaction with the drug and something else. You're changing the chemical structure of your body, so there's always a reaction. I'm not telling you not to take medication. You just need to know what the side effects are. Yeah, you need to know what the side effects are. As interesting as that is. Okay, sorry.
It was a bird.
It was white. What are you guys doing with anything white down here? They have snow geese up north, and swans are white. You guys know what swans are. Some neurotransmitters make it more likely that a neuron will fire, and these are known as excitatory neurotransmitters. Other neurotransmitters make it less likely that the neuron will fire, and these are known as inhibitory. And most of your inhibitory neurotransmitters have to do with gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, glycines. They're glycines. They're inhibitory. Often both inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters are working on the same neuron, trying to control it. And that's the way we are. We try to balance everything. Remember, everything has to stay in balance. Take that aspirin, headache goes away. At the same time, we've got acid reflux. Whoa, now everything's kind of in balance. Your headache's gone, you got aspirin in your belly, and you got acid reflux. busting up through your esophagus, into your esophagus. But your body, of course, tries to keep everything in balance. That's why we have the inhibitory and excitatory neurotransmitters. The neuron will be more or less likely to fire depending on which neurotransmitter is stimulated. So if you get too excited, of course, the inhibitory neurotransmitter will fire and it will not allow the neuron to fire. The neurotransmitter will be injected into the synaptic cleft to keep it from firing, because we try to control things. Now, however, we can take drugs, we can take medications that will control this. We can, if we take crystal meth. Crystal meth, all bets are off, excites everything. I know, forces all that excitement. All the neurotransmitters are excitatory neurotransmitters. So all of a sudden you're all keyed up. We can do this with marijuana. We can do this with heroin. We can do this with alcohol. We can do this with tobacco. I know. We can do this with caffeine if you're sensitive to caffeine. Caffeine is in lots of things, including tea. Tea. Is that green tea? Oh, it's supposed to keep you alive. We've got Monique's drinking a Red Bull back there. I know. Caffeine makes you excited. Caffeine makes you excited in the tea. I know. See, that's why the Brits wanted the caffeine. They needed the tea because it made it excited. And they had tea time every afternoon. Why? So that they could work, they could function the rest of the day. So they'd eat that. Actually, they would eat biscuits, which in their case are cookies. So they put all that sugar and all that caffeine in their system. Then maybe they could function for the rest of the day. Anyway, not important. If enough neurotransmitter crosses the synaptic cleft, the neuron will be stimulated to fire. Neurons have only one intensity. Either it fires or it doesn't fire. There's no, you don't go off half-cocked as far as neurotransmitters are concerned. You only go off full-cocked. You only have one reaction, and it's a full reaction. When a neuron fires, the neurotransmitter stimulation must reach the threshold level to make the neuron fire. And of course, that's what this picture is all about. It either fires, either the ball gets to the top and rolls down the hill, or it doesn't make it up to the top and it doesn't fire. That's the way neurons work. There are billions of neurons and trillions of synapses in the nervous system, most of which are in the brain, of course. There are two major parts to the nervous system. The central nervous system is the nerves of the brain and the spinal column, and then you have the peripheral nervous system, which is everything else. So this is the central nervous system, and everything in yellow is the peripheral nervous system. I seem to say the same thing every week. There we go. The peripheral nervous system is divided into the autonomic nervous system. It links the central nervous system to the heart, the intestines, and other internal organs. That's the peripheral nervous system. The somatic nervous system carries messages from the sensory organs, the eyes, the ears, and other sensory organs, and it gives you all of that information so that you can function. The autonomic nervous system is divided into two divisions. The sympathetic nervous system that gets us ready for fight or flight. It increases your heart rate. It inhibits your digestion, because digestion takes a lot of energy, and you need that energy to either fight or flee. It stimulates glucose from the liver to give you more energy. The adrenal glands will secrete steroids to get you excited. And it dilates your pupils so that you can see better. The parasympathetic nervous system returns you back to a normal state, an unexcited state. The human brain weighs about 3 pounds. Is that all? Just 3 pounds? The brain starts as a swelling at the top of the spinal column. This swelling is the brainstem, which regulates most of the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. Damage to the brainstem can stop your heart, it can stop your breathing, it can stop your digestion. And this is because the medulla has been damaged. So if somebody's brain dead, if somebody's on life support, Usually they're on life support because something's going on with the brainstem. And if that something is swelling, then potentially the swelling can go away, and then you can take them off of life support. This is the way it works. I know, this is kind of interesting. So you got to get a hold of them, and you've got to keep their heart beating. You got to keep them breathing until you can put them on life support. Then you can support them. As I told you before, and this is kind of an ugly story, but when I was working in the hospital in Omaha, I worked at a hospital that maintained people on life support so that we could harvest their organs. And most of these guys were, I know that sounds horrible, most of these guys were, somebody had to do it. What are you going to do, let them die? You got to keep them fresh so that the organs are good. Anyway, most of the guys that we had were motorcycle riders because Iowa didn't have a helmet law. So these guys would fall off the back of their motorcycle, and either they would crush their skull and damage their brainstem, in which case they're brain dead, or they would, I don't know if you've ever fallen backwards before, but your head hyperextends, and they would hit their head, and it would cut into their brainstem. Their skull would cut into their brainstem. We saw this over and over again. Normally you can go, well, maybe the swelling will go down. In a lot of these cases, the brainstem was almost severed because they had hit so hard. But they're motorcycles. That's kind of dumb. Flying down the road at 65 miles an hour, then you fall off the back of it? Or whatever, you hit something, you hit your head. I don't know. But I guess that's the danger and the beauty of motorcycles. It's pretty dangerous. Even with a helmet, sometimes they would fall off the back of their motorcycle, and the helmet would cut into their brainstem. Same thing. And these are usually healthy guys, pretty healthy individuals. Usually males, strangely enough. But we have too many men in the world anyway, right? Nobody's agreeing or disagreeing. Okay, well, maybe we don't have too many guys. Anyway, these guys were falling off the back of their motorcycles, and there was not a whole lot we could do. Of course, in most states, you can put on your driver's license whether you want your organs to be donated. You can donate your organs. It's usually on your driver's license. And of course, at that point, we would put them on life support in ICU. And we would start harvesting their organs if the family agreed to it. Even if the guy agreed to it, you'd still have to get the family to agree to it. I know, it sounds like a macabre job to have. I'm not the one that cut the organs out. All I did was check them to make sure they were okay. Okay. I know it sounds god-awful. It sounds like something out of a science fiction story, but that's what we did. A blow to the medulla can prove to be fatal, of course. You can't breathe, your heart stops beating, and you stop digesting food. We can, if we put you on life support, we can stimulate your heart to beat. We can pump air into your lungs, allow you to breathe. There's nothing we can do about digestion. We can keep you alive by putting a feeding tube in your stomach. I know, it sounds horrible, doesn't it? If you remember the case of Terry Schiavo, she was on a feeding tube for like 10 years. As horrible as that sounds. We start out by putting the tube down your throat. Eventually, of course, if it's prolonged, then we'll make a hole in your thorax and put the tube into your stomach. Equally fatal is an overdose of opiates, which may stop the individual from breathing and slow their heart to the point of arrest. And this is the reason that we have to inject somebody with Narcan at that stage, and that will truncate the effects of the opiate, and the person will come back to life. That's one of the reasons why Narcan is so important. Above the medulla is a widening area known as the pons. The pons regulate your sleep, your breathing, your swallowing, your bladder control, your equilibrium, your taste, eye movement, facial expressions, and posture. This is the pons. So you can imagine if this was damaged, that You wouldn't be able to swallow anymore. A lot of times these individuals will choke to death. And the reason is because they can't swallow. If you're ever around anybody old like me, sometimes I'll swallow down the wrong tube and I start coughing. This happens to my wife. Usually it happens to her when she's talking to me on the telephone. I haven't quite figured that one out yet, but I'm thinking about it. Try to figure it out. Anyway, so, and this is a problem. Usually my aunt died of, she choked to death. She had Alzheimer's disease, and she lived for a long time. But then eventually, of course, she was sleeping one time. She tried to swallow, it went down the wrong tube, and she choked to death. I know, wow, it was like, she hadn't had a lucid thought in 10 years, so, I mean, it wasn't that much of a tragedy. She finally died. Okay. That's the way the family saw it. Good things and bad things about her death. Well, I don't know about the bad things. Of course, she wasn't suffering because there was no lucidity in the brain. Her brain was pretty much mush. What else? We had run out of. She actually started out with about $1.5 million, and by the time she was done, she was on Medicaid because she was non-functional. You know, there was no way for her to get any money, and so she was on Medicaid by the end, and we were paying for her housing. And we paid for about 1.5 years before she choked to death. But, you know, so I mean, and it was hard on the family because here, you know, we'd go and to see Aunt Florine, and she's just laying there. I mean, she couldn't react to this. We're just keeping her, which seems kind of mean, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. I don't know how you feel about these things. But we weren't all that sad that Aunt Florine died. Not because of the money, but because, well, we couldn't see any reason for her to still be alive. Or for her, she couldn't care. I mean, it's like keeping something. You can look at it a lot of different ways. Running through the brainstem is a series of fibers that makes up a structure known as the reticular formation. The reticular formation controls arousal and sleep. The reticular formation prioritizes incoming information. If there is damage to the reticular formation, the individual may be thrown into a coma. And when we say damage, if it's severed, of course, they will be in a coma for the rest of their lives. They're not on life support at this stage, but of course they don't wake up. They have no lucid moments. Sometimes there could be swelling in around the reticular formation. The brain is really kind of interesting. It's fairly isolated. And because it's isolated, it's not used to things happening to it. It's not like you hit your arm and you bruise and your arm goes, I don't care, man, come on, I can still function. Or you can even shoot yourself, I mean, get shot in the arm, and as long as it doesn't do that much damage to the muscle, your arm is still relatively functional. But the brain doesn't work that way. The brain is a relatively isolated structure. And if something happens to it, it tries to protect itself. And the way it protects itself is by swelling. And the swelling is supposed to protect that area from anything else happening to it. So if that happens, a lot of times you'll have a reaction. And the reaction isn't very positive. Because that area is now, it can't function because of the swelling. And so we see this all the time. People get hit in the head, and so they get a concussion. Now we've got swelling inside the brain, and the individual isn't going to be as lucid as they were before. That portion of the brain that was damaged is no longer functional, and it won't be functional until that swelling goes down. And this is one of the reasons why we are so, and if the swelling is prolonged, this is fluid accumulating in that area. It can kill that area of the brain. You can't have alien fluid in an area for a prolonged period of time. If you had a swollen knee, and you had a swollen knee for months on end, it would destroy your knee. would destroy structures in your knee. That's not supposed to happen. You can't have blood just sitting in your body, not circulating. It's toxic, and it can cause a negative reaction. So this is one of the reasons why we try to draw fluids off whenever possible. If we can get to it, we'll draw it off. Especially fluid on the knee. Can't leave it in there, or it will destroy the knee. We will drain fluid from the brain. We see this in little babies. If they're born with spina bifida, they have an excess amount of cerebrospinal fluid. We can't leave that in there. We have to take that out. Otherwise, the child will lose its intellectual capability. So if we can put a drain in the brain, if somebody is brain with hydrocephaly, with an expanded skull because of fluid on the brain, we have to draw that fluid off, or it will destroy their brain tissue. And if we can draw it up soon enough, then the individual will have no damage at all. And they will be just as bright as they would have been had they not been born with hydrocephaly. And this is one of the reasons why we have to do this with neonates right after they're born. If they have fluid on the brain, if they're hydrocephalic, we have to draw that stuff off. We have to put a tap in there. It's odd, just like a beer tap. It's the same structure. But we draw that fluid off. And we will leave that in there until we can secure their central nervous system by closing off their spinal cord.
How do they find the fluid inside the brain?
They know where it is. The brain is here.
How do they know that there's fluid in the brain? Is it through the...
It's in the images. It's around the images. That's where you should be.
Is it through the ultrasound?
No, well, they can see the baby's head is larger than it should be. And actually, we usually know this before the baby is born. With ultrasound. I know, isn't that great? But that's not all. There's a test called the alpha-fetoprotein. And if the baby is hydrocephalic, the alpha-fetoprotein will be elevated. If the baby has Down syndrome, the alpha-fetoprotein will be low. So we can tell if a mother's carrying a hydrocephalic baby, or if she's carrying, if there's a central nervous system damage, then it will be elevated. And if she has a baby with Down syndrome, it will be low. And it's a blood test. We don't have to stick. We don't have to do it. This was like angiogram. We don't have to go into the uterus. We don't have to draw an amniotic fluid, amniocentesis. All we have to do is draw our blood. We do an alpha-fetoprotein. So with a woman who is older than normal, somebody who's in her late 30s or early 40s or even 50s, that one Norwegian lady just had a baby at 53. I'm trying to think what her name was. She was in that video with German. Big, tall, skinny lady. She was also in the Rocky movie with the Russian boxer. She was the wife. Richard Nielsen, that's it. She just had a baby at 53. Janet Jackson had a baby in her 50s. So if somebody's that old, the probability that the ova was not too old to be impregnated, so that's a greater possibility. My daughter was 43, and they did an alpha-fetoprotein. They did everything on that poor kid. Of course, we were trying to maintain her pregnancy. We were scared to death that there would be a problem, but of course there never was a problem. So, and here, of course, I teach this shit. I teach this stuff. I teach this stuff, and she's a biology teacher. Yeah.
His grandma said, like, it's both. Yeah, already introduced him to that.
Oh, it's grandma that does it. It was my mom that introduced my daughter to it. Anyway, so we were watching her through the whole thing, and so we knew every time she passed another time when she could have lost her pregnancy, we were all going. Yeah. As soon as the baby was 22 weeks, we're going. It's a done deal now. The baby's going to be born. So. Anyway, okay, so they can go into a coma. Good stuff, bad stuff. Above the brainstem is a fairly large structure. So the point is, these guys that have lots of concussions, football players, especially linemen, football linemen, they use their foreheads as a battering ram. A lot of times, one of the things that's going on in the brain is not just sitting there, it's not attached to anything, it's attached to the rest of the body. It's floating around in fluid. So if you get a blow to the front of the head, actually you get a blow to the back of the head as an opposite reaction while it's in there. So you actually get at least two shots every time you take a shot. You're getting 2 shots. So anybody that's had a concussion, a lot of these football players who play for 10 or 15 years, Tom Brady, of course, has always had a pretty good offensive line, but I wouldn't doubt that he is starting to have, he's 41, he's starting to have reactions to all these concussions that he's had. Almost all the quarterbacks do, because of course they're the target. Now they try to protect the quarterback. They don't want the quarterback to be knocked down, but my God. The Patriots were just killing Goff yesterday. I mean, they were, the ball was gone and they were hitting him. I mean, it was pretty bad. That guy hit the ground more than the linemen were hitting the ground. It was pretty bad. Anyway, so potentially, football is a very destructive sport. And you use your head as a battering ram. So a lot of these people have a lot of damage.
So if you reverse the where you were talking about Stephen Hawkins, most of his body was disintegrated.
Yeah, well, he had ALS.
Who are you going?
Sorry?
Who are you going?
Oh, you mean the game yesterday? Well, I hate the Patriots. I hate the team that wins all the time. So, what is that? Their sixth victory, and now they're tied with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, I'm not real happy about their logo. It looks like Elvis. The winged Elvis. Yeah.
Who is your team?
I'm sorry?
Who is your team?
Oh, yeah. Indianapolis Colts, maybe. They're not that good. I'm not that interested in football. I gave up football when I started working on my dissertation, so I stopped watching football. Before, I could tell you everything about just about everything. You got to sacrifice something. At least I didn't sacrifice my marriage, which happens to just about everybody who gets a PhD. You have to sacrifice something. So you have to start ignoring things, working through the night, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I didn't lose my marriage, thank goodness. Above the brainstem is a fairly large structure that has less purpose than was first thought. It's an area called the thalamus. And for the longest time, since it's such a large structure, and since it has a central location, we thought it was really, 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 really important. Turns out that it's not that important. All it does is sort information. Sorts information and sends it where it needs to go. It sends it into the cerebrum for higher order thinking. Anything that you see, anything that you hear, anything that you taste, anything that you touch. It tries to warn you about the dangers of the environment. We have a problem. Noel, you guys have a problem. You're on your cell phones too much. This is a problem because you're not aware of what's happening around you. You're walking down the street, you're walking down the road. Sometimes you're in your car driving and where is your brain? Your brain is on that damn cell phone. And this potentially can be a problem. What if there's somebody around you that wants to do you harm? And you can look at them and you can see that they're angry and that they want to hurt you. What happens next? Well, me and Mose are going to be okay because we see everything. Don't we? Because that's the way we were trained. But we had to be trained to do that. But other individuals have never been in a dangerous situation. So you guys don't notice anything. So you could be in the middle of a city on your damn cell phone talking to your friend back in Tuba City, and there was a guy coming up behind you or somebody coming toward you with a knife, and you don't even see him. You don't see what's going on. Or maybe we're trained to ignore things. I just told a story in the last class about passing a kid with a AR-15 under his coat. Well, that's dangerous. And people are saying, just ignore it. It's probably nothing. But it potentially can be something, can it? And of course, if you're trained to be a protector, then that's what you do. You try to protect people. You don't want anything negative to happen. You try to keep those situations from happening. But a lot of people are totally oblivious because they're on their cell phones. They got something to do. I don't know what they're doing on the cell phone. Sure I do. You're playing Candy Crush. I haven't quite figured that one out. My sister plays Candy Crush, and on Facebook she wants me to acknowledge her so that she gets more points. I have no idea how that works. I never do. It was her birthday on Saturday. She's 71, and she plays Candy Crush constantly. What a brain dead game that is. Well, all the games are brain dead. They just take your attention away. The cerebellum is the second largest structure in the brain after the cerebrum. The cerebellum is in the back of the brain and is the major contributor to the voluntary muscle maintenance and plays a part in memory. And this is the cerebellum right here. The cerebellum in the Neanderthal man was much larger than ours is. So what does that mean? Well, we're not exactly sure. Neanderthal man had a larger brain than Homo sapien, than we have. By a lot, by quite a bit, actually. Our average size is like 750 milligrams. Theirs was 1,000. So it was a lot heavier. cc's, I'm sorry. 750 cc's. Cubic centimeters. The cerebellum has to do with body balance, it coordinates your voluntary muscles. It has something to do with memory. We're not exactly sure what. If you have a damage to your cerebellum, your language skills are decreased. Your thinking capacity goes down. Your cognition is decreased. But we're not exactly sure what it does. For the longest time, we just thought it had to do with movement, that it didn't have anything to do with thinking. But now we know. So maybe Neanderthal man was actually smarter than we are. How do you measure intelligence? Survivability? How do we know if they were smarter than us? We survived. And maybe we killed them all off. Maybe we ate them. Less filling, tastes great. That's beer. Damage to the cerebellum can cause poor muscle tone and tremors. Children with ADHD, this is fascinating. Children with ADHD and dyslexia have smaller than average cerebellum. Now the question is this a cause or an effect? Is it because their cerebellum is small that they have ADHD or dyslexia? Or is it because they have ADHD and dyslexia, it makes their cerebellum smaller? That's the question, and we're not exactly sure why. We're looking at a different structure in the brain as far as ADHD is concerned. We're looking to an area called cingulate gyrus. And I haven't read the research lately, so I'm not exactly sure where the research is going as far as ADHD is concerned. We do know that a lot of ADHD is not real. It's environmental. It's caused by the environment. It's a reaction to something else. If parents don't pay attention to their children, a lot of times they get symptoms of ADHD because their parents don't talk to them, don't interact with them. So they're looking for attention. They're attention seeking. And ADHD is attention seeking behavior. So they're misdiagnosed with ADHD, despite the fact they don't have a biochemical or structural problem in their brain. So then we treat them for ADHD, and now remember, every time you put a chemical in somebody's body, you get a side effect, and you get a reaction, and you get a side effect. This kid has no problem. This is not going to fix their ADHD. Hitting them with Adderall or Ritalin or Statera, what is that other stuff? I just read this last night. No, I don't know. Anyway, it starts with an S. Anyway, okay. Despite the fact that you hit them with this stuff, it's not going to fix anything. Because their problem is nobody's paying attention to them. And I don't think if you give somebody a medication, it's going to make somebody else pay attention to them. The only way they have to get somebody to pay attention to them is to act out, and then the other person reacts. Just something to think about. So, you know, these are problems we have with medicine. There is no one size fits all. It just doesn't work that way. If I'm in pain, I can't take opiates. That size may fit 95% of the population, but it doesn't fit me. So what happens every time I'm in pain? The doctors try to hit me with opiates. And I go, no, that doesn't work on me. And of course, they don't acknowledge because this doesn't fit what they want to think. So you can't convince them that they're wrong. Bastards. That's why I call them bastards. You keep convincing them of anything. They don't listen to you. Doctors. Write that down. Doctors. Just write down doctors. They're all bastards. In the middle of the, I'm sorry. In the middle of the brain is the limbic system. The limbic system is the amygdala, which means almond in Latin. It's shaped like an almond. The hippocampus, the amygdala has to do with emotions. Usually it has to do, if you hit one portion of the amygdala, it will make you angry. And if you hit another portion, it will keep you from being angry, which is kind of exciting. So the anger is right there in one organ. Of course, you have one on each side. Hippocampus, which means seahorse. It's shaped like a seahorse. This is it down here. The hippocampus has to do with memory. The hypothalamus has to do with everything. Hypothalamus controls, well, we're going to talk about that in just a second. But it controls just about everything, your hypothalamus. This is where you need testosterone in order to have a sex drive. Is the sex drive important? Yeah, it has to do with reproduction. Without reproduction, humans wouldn't exist anymore. So reproduction is really kind of important if you think about it. If you like humans. If you don't like humans, I guess it's not important. So let's just do away with the sex drive. I know, we can give you medications that will take away your sex drive. Wait a minute, we already do that with Prozac and Zoloft and Paxil and Effexor. All these things reduce your sex drive because they increase your serotonin level in your hypothalamus. And then the septal area. These structures play an important role in emotions, especially your sexual arousal, your aggression, and your pain. I was reading an article the other day about humans and how in the world we evolved. Why in the world have we become civilized? That was the question. And it said, we civilized ourselves. Well, how? Of course we civilized ourselves. Well, how did we do that? We got a bunch of humans together and we all started running around together, but which ones were the ones that we liked and which ones were the ones that we didn't like? Well, the ones that were too aggressive, we didn't like those guys. I mean, you guys can sit here in this classroom without throwing anything at me so far. Because you're all controlled. You've controlled yourself. We have evolved this way. And how have we evolved this way? We've got aggressive tendencies. We just two weeks ago, we just had those guys shoot and kill 5 people apiece. We do have aggressive tendencies. How do we control our aggression? We control our aggression with serotonin. How did we keep one guy from wandering around and raping all the women? How did we do that? What happened to that guy? The guy that wanted to rape everybody, always trying to tear women's clothes off and have sex with them. What happened to that guy? We killed him. There was something wrong with it. We didn't like it. It didn't fit with our mindset. So we killed it. So of course we civilized ourselves. And we did this with brain chemistry and with brain chemistry and social control. That's how we did it. So if somebody was overly aggressive, we got rid of them. And if and they fell out of the gene pool. So he didn't reproduce with somebody that and make another person like that. So he fell out of the gene pool. In the same way with the rapists, same way with the hyper-aggressive person and the hypersexual person. They fell out of the gene pool. And this is one of the reasons why so many aspects of life, of our mindset, follows the female line. If a male is too aggressive, they just killed it. But did they kill the female? And if a female is too aggressive, what does that look like? If she's too aggressive, she has a different. She acts differently. The males act one way and females act another way. So did she drop out of the gene pool? Well, potentially not. So that's why everything seems to follow the female line, not the male line, but the female line. The male line is fairly constant. The female line is, if he's too aggressive, then he fell out of the gene pool. If he's too sickly, he fell out of the gene pool. If she's too sickly, she can't have babies, she fell out of the gene pool. If she has too many things wrong with her, she isn't able to reproduce, and she falls out of the gene pool. And this is the way it's been going for eons, for millions of years, as long as humans have been alive. We have used selective breeding in order to perpetuate the best things in us, and we have created the individual that we are today. But now we're giving people medications. People are getting drunk and doing stupid things, driving, killing people, taking Prozac and picking up a gun and shooting people, smoking marijuana. When they're not smoking, they're so grouchy that they pick up a gun and shoot people. Anyway, picking up cell phones. And you guys are going to have to deal with this. I don't have to deal with this. I'm too old. You can take a snapshot of exactly what's going on today, and that's all I have to deal with. When I'm 80 years old, I'm not going to be playing this game anymore. Maybe I'll be like Wilson and stick around until I'm 88. Who knows? But you guys are going to have to deal with this. Things are changing, and things are accelerating. So the crap that's going on right now, you're going to have to figure out what's going on. And you're going to have to figure out how to change it. And you're going to have to recognize what is wrong. That's the problem. People don't want things to change. They want things to stay the same. People want to read a book and find out how this works, and nothing ever changed. They don't want to see change. If there's change, it means they have to change things. But they're going to have to recognize it, and then they're going to have to fix it. It's one of the reasons why it took years to figure out what HIV was. Nobody wanted to see anything new, to see anything different. And it's going to be the same way with mental health. The internet has only been around since 1993. We don't know what it does to people. We don't know how it changes their intellect, their minds. Maybe it accelerates, it makes you smarter. Maybe it makes you dumb. This is one of the reasons why we don't know what to do with marijuana. Why in the world don't they just legalize it? Then we can make a lot more money. Why don't we just legalize it? We don't know what the stuff does. And of course, we're getting higher and higher doses. Will the higher doses of THC change things? Does this make it more dangerous? We don't know. That's one of the reasons why we can't legalize it. They keep moving the goalposts. I mean, if marijuana was the same way it was back in the 60s, well, geez, it barely gave anybody a buzz. Now, all of a sudden, it just fries people's brains. We don't know. So that's when you're on it. What happens when you're off of it? Well, you're grouchy. Well, if you're taking a stronger dosage, does that mean you're grouchy? That you're more dangerous? That you're more aggressive? That's what we're finding. That people, when they're not smoking marijuana, are more angry because it makes them grouchier. So, and you guys are going to have to deal with it. I don't have to worry about it. I can vote against legalizing marijuana all week. But you guys are going to have to make those decisions, not me. Not me and my wife. The amygdala, which means almond in Latin, of course, is located at the end of the hippocampus and appears to control aggression and other emotions. Now, its position is really kind of interesting. It's right in front of the hippocampus. Hippocampus has to do with memory. So why in the world would the emotional portion of your brain, the part that determines and creates aggression, why would it be right in front of the memory part? Why is it there? Why isn't it someplace else? If you're ever in danger and you're scared, you need to remember that so that the next time it happens, you know to be scared. You know that it's dangerous. You recognize it instantaneously so that the next time it happens, it doesn't kill you. If you think I'm kidding about this whole killing thing, I'm not. Back in the day, it was dangerous. If I saw smoke on the horizon, it means that there's somebody over there, and potentially they're not friendly to me. So I need to go in another direction, not the opposite direction. I'd be going backward. I need to get away from that smoke. First time I might have gone, oh look, there's somebody over there. And then they attacked me, and then I went, oh my goodness gracious, I shouldn't have done that. So now I've learned. Now I go in the opposite direction, not the opposite direction, but I've gone in a different direction from the smoke. The hippocampus, the seahorse, is a seahorse-shaped organ that is involved in spatial orientation, learning, and memory, of course, and this is how we learn. But we learn emotional things almost immediately, and this is very, very important because you need to understand how to react, and you need to protect yourself. Damage to the hippocampus causes anterograde amnesia, where the individual can't form new memories. And so this really doesn't happen all that often. Anterograde amnesia is relatively rare. But with cell phones, maybe we'll see more of anterograde amnesia, where people can't remember things. Maybe with marijuana, the stronger doses of marijuana interrupts your short-term memory. So potentially this is what we're going to see in the future. You're going to see in the future. You're going to have to worry about it. I told you guys not to legalize marijuana. If you legalize marijuana, and they voted on it in this state last year. Yeah, 2018. And you didn't legalize it, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't want to live in a state where marijuana is legalized. It makes everybody lazy and stupid. I don't mind the stupid part, it's the lazy part that bugs me. Both of them bug me. And the problem is you can't tell them anything because they can't remember what you said before anyway. So you can't even talk to them. They think everything's funny. Dumb shit. I'm sorry. My son ran into this in Colorado, up in Colorado. When he got there, the marijuana wasn't legal. By the time he left, it was legal. He tried to work for a couple of years with people that had been smoking marijuana. Impossible. They don't do anything. And they don't care. And they get paid for not doing anything. So it's the one guy that doesn't smoke marijuana that does all the work. And of course, he's that kind of a guy anyway. He works his tail off. So it ended up he was doing everything. He was bartending, he was waiting on tables, and he was cooking in the back. I know, he's doing everything. The cooks were back and behind the building smoking pot. You give them an order, and it'd never come out. So somebody had to go back there and do that stuff. Now you would think that they would have fired the guys that were doing that. But they didn't, and the reason is because the owner was a smoker. He was a toker as well. So he thought it was cool that all of these people that worked for him were, and it was my son who was doing all the work. I know. But if you told that to the owner, he wouldn't remember it from 1 minute to the next anyway. So my son left and the place just collapsed, as you can imagine. Anyway, it's not important. A structure that don't worry about a bar in downtown Denver. Don't worry about it. It's not important. A structure that is sandwiched between the thalamus and the pituitary gland is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus influences your hunger, tells you when you're hungry, tells you when to stop eating, tells you when you're thirsty. This happened to me this morning. I forgot to make lemonade before I went to bed last night, woke up, and I was so thirsty I could have drunk the toilet. I was that thirsty. So I got up and I had a pitcher of lemonade and I drank half of it. I was so thirsty. Body temperature, it regulates your body temperature, regulates your sexual behavior. And of course you can either talk about sex or not talk about sex, but it has to do with reproduction. Reproduction has to do with perpetuation of the species. So as far as that's concerned, sexual behavior is really, really, really important. Metabolism, it tells your body how to feed itself, and it interprets what pleasure is. Have you ever been around somebody that didn't seem to be able to get pleasure out of anything? Have you ever been around that guy? Sure you have. You just probably didn't want to acknowledge it. Yeah. Never smiled. I seem to run into these people all the time. They gravitate to me because I'm happy all the time. So they think if they're around me that maybe they'll feel something positive. So I get to be around these people all the time. Grouchos. Not very happy people. If they were like Groucho, they'd tell jokes all the time. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works. The cerebrum represents 80% of the human brain. However, despite its sheer volume, the part that makes us the intellectual giants that we are is just the 3 millimeters of the surface mass, the cerebral cortex. So it isn't the entire brain, it's the cerebral cortex. It's just the bark on the mass of your cerebrum that gives you your intelligence. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 distinct lobes. The frontal lobe is in the front and controls routine thought, reasoning, and voluntary movement. And unfortunately, if you play football, this is what you lead with. This is what you hit first, is your frontal cortex, your frontal lobe. This is the part you bang more than any place else. The other thing that you bang is your occipital lobe. You hit here and it also bangs against the back of your skull. You get an opposite reaction to it. So a lot of these individuals, by the time they're done with football, with using their heads as battering rams, they don't see as well as they did before. They don't interpret things that they see like they used to. Some of these individuals can't drive anymore because it takes time for them to figure out what's going on as they're driving down the road. Who's Jim McMahon, you probably don't remember, he was on a Super Bowl team with the Chicago Bears. He was their quarterback. He's a vegetable now. As cute as that is. About 2 years ago, he was still relatively functional. Well, he could have a conversation, but he couldn't always have a conversation. You had to catch him at the right minute, the moment.
I saw him with BYU.
Yeah.
And then I just saw him they were not signed to the Bears.
He was quite a fella. I met him. My daughter was working at Biltmore in Phoenix, and he was there, and I met him. And he was he was funny, really, really funny. But you can't even talk to him. He's totally non-functional. Well, anyway. And there's a lot of football players that are this way. So the frontal lobe has to do with voluntary movement and reasoning. The parietal lobe starts about halfway back and collects and controls sensory information, especially from the skin. Now this is really kind of interesting. Why would movement be right on top of your head? Why would it be here? Possibly, it's right in the middle, so yeah, balance may have something to do with it. It's also relatively protected. Your movement's probably the most important thing about you, not your thinking process, not whether you're a genius or not. It's the fact that you can get away from a lion or a bear or whatever. Did you hear about that little boy that in North Carolina that he said that a bear protected him while he should have frozen to death. I mean, the temperature went down into the 20s. And this kid said that the bear stayed with him and protected him for like 2 days. Dude, that's freaky and spooky. Don't talk about freaky and spooky things. Marius is here. We'll scare. The occipital lobe is the very back of the brain and processes visual stimuli. As I said, football players, they lose their eyesight. Not really, they don't go blind, that's not the problem. But they have problems. Is it time? I have a minute. The temporal lobe is, well, Marius is here, I should have figured that one out. The temporal lobe is on the side of the brain and in the ear region and processes sound, of course. So when you get hit in the head, one of the things that we do is we ask you, how many fingers am I holding up? For one thing, we want to know if you got a blow to the temporal lobe. So can you hear what I'm saying and can you process the words that I'm saying? And we want to know if you got hit in the occipital lobe. And so we're holding up fingers. Usually it's 3, sometimes it's 2. It all depends on whether you want them to go back in. If you want them to go back in, you hold up 2 fingers so that they can see it very easily. And you also want them to reason with you, and that's one of the reasons why you ask them a question. You want them to hear, you want them to see, and you want them to think. And that's why we do that. Of course, if they get up and they can't walk around very well.